All right, I'll start with the intro as more people are coming on. But first off, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We do have a lot to cover, so I'm going to do a quick intro and then we'll pass off to our speaker. My name is Cece Mortar. I'm the programs manager for the Steamboat Springs Chamber. First, I want to give a quick shout out to our business education series sponsors, Mountain Valley Bank, Employers Council, Northwest Data Services, and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. A couple of house cleaning items. Please switch your chat from panelists to everyone so that everyone can see your chat. And then we also ask that you put questions in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end, but if questions come up throughout, please put them in as soon as you think of them, and we will keep an eye out and cover them as we go too. I will also be sending out the recording and the slides this afternoon for you. It's my pleasure to introduce Matt Barnard, our speaker today on project management. Matt works for the City of Steamboat Springs in the Parks and Recreation Department as the development manager. So with that, I'll let you get started, Matt. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Cece, for the introduction. Hello to everyone out there. I'm going to start by just sharing my screen. And is that coming through as full screen, Cece?
No, it's not yet.
Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, looks great.
I just want to talk about my background a little bit. Like Cece said, my name is Matt Barnard. I work for the City of Steamboat Springs. I am the development manager for Parks and Recreation. I started my career at the University of Wisconsin with a construction management degree. And sorry, I'm just moving some things around my screen. Sorry. After graduation, or actually while I was still in school, I took an internship with Western Summit Constructors, whose parent company was TIC, who was based in Steamboat Springs. I'm sure a lot of you know TIC. We were a water and wastewater specialist company. We built water and wastewater treatment plants. So heavy civil construction is really what my background was. I did an internship for them. I went back to school and finished my last couple semesters, and then they hired me on full time as a project engineer for them. I worked on several projects in the Front Range, and then in 2008, TIC and Western Summit were both acquired by Kiewit Corporation, and continue to work for them as a project engineer, field engineer, and estimator. And then I was slighted to take a position with them in Australia, and my wife was pregnant at the same time. And it wasn't going to work out for us. It was a 3-year commitment. I was would be living in a man camp out in the bush, and my wife would be living in Perth, and I'd only be home or back to see her every 2 weeks. And so I decided to leave Kiewit at that time, and I took a job with S.J. Lewis in their Minnesota office, as I'm originally from the Midwest. And I'd been bidding against S.J. Lewis on several projects, so I kind of knew what their company makeup was all about, and that they were also a big, heavy infrastructure company. And so I took a job with them in Minnesota, and the promise was, that I would be off the road. I'd typically been traveling about 80% of my year and 20% out of the home office for Kiewit. And moving back to Minnesota, I thought I was going to switch that, be 80% out of the office and 20% on the road, and nothing really changed. So I actually did less than a year with S.J. Lewis before I kind of needed to switch gears just to make a better work-life balance for myself. I ended up taking a job with the city of Lakeville in Minnesota. It is one of the southern suburbs of the Minneapolis, the Twin Cities metro. I was the construction services superintendent there. I worked for the Public Works Department, and I really handled all of the heavy infrastructure for the city. The city is a fairly large metro at the time when I joined, it was about a population of 65,000 people, and we were one of the outer bands of the metro. And so we were only about 60% built out. So we had a lot of new construction going in with new developers. So I managed the infrastructure of those subdivisions, but we also had a pretty extensive street reconstruction program in place that we were going through and removing water main, sanitary lines, storm sewer lines, and then we would rebuild the street section. And we would do about 10 miles of that work a year. And then we did various other infrastructure projects. We were always doing improvements to the water treatment plant there, which really fit well in my background from what I had been doing at Western Summit and with Kiewit. So found a really cool niche there. That's when I really started managing a team of engineers. I had 4 typically civil engineers working for me and also kind of managing those projects. And in the summer season, when we'd really get going, we would take on 2 additional consultants. So we had a team of 6 that I was managing at that time to do that work. And now with the city of Steamboat Springs, personally, I just wanted to get back to Colorado. So I started looking for an opportunity to come back. I didn't know if I wanted to be in the Front Range again. And I saw this opportunity in Steamboat. They were advertising for a project manager in their Parks and Rec department. So I interviewed for that and ended up taking the job. And I think what is super interesting about this is my background managing projects. You know, it really translates well into different genres of work. And so now I'm less about heavy infrastructure. I still love to talk about concrete and large diameter pipe and concrete, you know, vertical construction buildings, but I don't do much of that anymore. And I'm just managing other type of work, but it's still really interesting. And I think the variety at this point in my career is super welcomed. I kind of just like moving into a different chapter. So super happy to be in Steamboat. I've been here almost 4 years now, working in the Parks and Rec department, and it seems to be a really good fit. I'm going to kind of jump into kind of some of the talking points that I think we were looking for with this presentation. But I'm really going to use the lens of my experience and the position that I'm in right now. I think I'll reference some other projects back from, you know, Kiewit days and things like that too. But I think by putting some examples in and some context into this, maybe it's going to be easier for you to kind of maybe relate it to projects that you're seeing or that your business is maybe has kind of coming down that pipeline. Identifying stakeholders, project origination is really critical when you're setting up a new project. Who are you working for? Who are the people that are going to help you make these decisions and run this project? Defining roles of project sponsors. I've used the word project sponsors all the way back from my Kiewit days. Who is really going to help? I'm going to probably do the heavy lifting as the project manager or construction manager on a project, but who is going to help be that ownership group that ultimately I'm building this project for, and we're going to turn that over to later. On the screen, I've got the master plan from 2016 for Bear River Park, which is one of the bigger projects that I'm pushing right now. We're in the design phase of this project. And you talk about, you know, who are the project sponsors for this? In Parks and Rec, I report to the director. So she is one of my project sponsors. We also have a parks manager. He is one of my project sponsors. That's kind of our internal core team. There's other project partners, financial partners. The city is funding this project out of our capital improvement project. So really only have one partner there. Work partners. Right now I'm working with Norris Design, who is a landscape architect, but they do a lot of park design in Colorado. And so that's one of our partners right now that's doing, you know, the park design for us. We have different tiers working underneath them. We have civil engineers working with us. We have some water engineers working with us as Bear River Park has a boat ramp that we're trying to install into the Yampa River. So a lot of different partners there. But I think one of the important ones, specifically for Parks and Rec or any of the city departments is the community. You know, we're building this park on the west end of town, you know, for the community. So, you know, tapping into that community and hearing from those project partners on what kinds of things they want in the park, how they want the park to interact with their environment kind of on the west end are super important. So we do outreach and we do steering committees. If you don't know, Bear River has a bike park right now and has a skate park. Part of this project is to expand those. And so I've created, I call them steering committees, where I solicit people from those specific interest groups, and then we meet, and then I bring in like the designers. So we have 2 national designers that are doing the bike park for us and the skate park, and we co-host this meeting with community involvement, and we start out typically with some really simple concept plans on how that skate park or how that bike park feature could be, and then quickly it turns into like this snowball of just people saying, well, hey, what if we added more, you know, this style of ramp or these kind of dirt jumps out there. And it's really easy to facilitate a community engagement meeting for Parks and Rec, because at the end of it, these people are going to be the ones using it. Previously, when I would be doing a street recon project, I would also hold a community engagement meeting. And it was typically a much different tone in those meetings. People were on the defensive, you know, what kind of impacts are you going to do to the street? You know, where is my mailbox going to be relocated while you're removing and replacing all the curb in front of my house? And so, you know, people are always nervous about, you know, what were those short-term sacrifices? But being in Parks and Rec, it's really flipped the other way. Like, people come, they're excited, they want their voice heard, they want to make sure that you know, that park that we leave when we're done with the project is something they're going to enjoy for years to come. So I think the project partners with the community is way more fun for me now that I'm working for the Parks and Rec division. Who does the project impact? Obviously, property owners. As you see this master plan, you can kind of see on the northwest end of the park there that it abuts that Riverside neighborhood. There's lots of neighbors that their backyards share a property boundary with Bear River Park. And early on in this process, when I did one of my first outreaches at the park, you know, a lot of those neighbors came concerned. They're like, are you going to cut down all the trees? Are you going to put a trail right up against my backyard property boundary? Are you going to fill in the wetland, you know, all that natural habitat out there, and the cranes, are they all going to go away? And so a lot of it, my job is really just informing and kind of telling the story of what the park is going to be and the intent. I think everybody can see these drawings and get an idea, but unless they hear it kind of from, you know, somebody close to this information, there's just not any trust there. So, you know, that's part of my job too, is getting out there and just establishing a connection with into the people that you're impacting. There's always going to be utility owners, you know, that have easements through your projects. We have a gas, we have water, and we have sanitary that also come through the park. Thankfully, 2 of those utilities are city-owned utilities on that end of town, so it's just an easy internal communication. Environmental impacts, you know, we impact people, we impact things like utilities, but we're also impacting the environment. We're changing the shape and the current function of that space. If you didn't know, Bear River Park was an old sanitary sewer treatment plant, and a lot of the west end that's now a wetland, it was actually a sanitary lagoon at one point in time. It's kind of been repurposed and cleaned up. That site has also been used to dispose of the old street section from Lincoln Avenue is buried in that park. So there's a lot of interesting things out there, the environmental impacts, as we're getting into design, that we're trying to understand and make sure we're mitigating them and leaving some of that stuff in the right phase. Is it good of us to leave the dugout lagoon as a natural space? Is it okay for us to leave all this concrete and asphalt rubble underneath the surface? What kind of impacts are those? So those are all things that we're looking at as we're kind of kicking that project off. Defining project scope. As you can see, we've kind of got a photo here of the new triple chairlift at Howelson Hill. This was one of my first projects when I showed up in Steamboat and started my career there. I sat down with our director, and I also sat down with the Hyelson Hill manager, and we sat down and just had a brainstorming session on a picnic table over in that Howelson Hill area, and just tried to talk about all the things that we thought we were going to touch, and all the things we thought we were going to impact, and all the things that we thought were going to be costs for this project. I kind of recorded all this information into line items, and that's how I started building the scope for this project. Was I certainly didn't know everything about, what it takes to run a ski area, or what it takes to operate a chairlift. I've ridden several chairlifts, sure, but when you start thinking about these things, how to really break it down into bites that you can handle, it was really great to be partnered with project sponsors. Having our director there always kind of just ringing that bell for cost, that we can't go crazy, with this budget. From that initial brainstorming session at that picnic table at Howelson Hill, I started breaking things down into categories, and I really tried to simplify things, because I knew there was going to be a team more than just myself trying to digest some of this information. As I built that budget, that was a thought that was in my mind. The other thing at that point in time, when you're just kind of kicking off a project, is how is this work going to get completed? How are we going to bid this project? Are we just going to hire one general contractor that comes in and manages everything? As easy as that sounds, there's still a lot of management of that person, but there's also a fee associated with that. We decided we were going to kind of operate as a GC ourselves, and I was going to manage all those individual contracts. We were going to hire specific trades to do work for us. There was going to be some self-perform work for us out there that we were going to do with some of our Parks and Rec staff. And then also establishing the funding early on. There was a $1.5 million that the city had put up in the capital budget. I think that was established in 2019, the year that I got there. So they had that money already reserved when I got there. And the Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club was also partnering in a 50-50 partnership with the city on this lift, as long as we did all the construction management of this. And they matched that 1.5 with 1.5 from a donor that they had were able to secure. So the strategy, the development of it, the initiation, the concept, the scope, feasibility. Is it feasible that we can build this chairlift, change the alignment, remove and replace, what was existing? Can we do it in that budget? And that was something that we had to work through. My original budget for this came to just basically $3 million. We were just slightly over $3 million was that initial budget. We did a lot of stakeholder engagement. And part of that stakeholder engagement was forming a steering committee that really stuck together through the life cycle of that chairlift project. We had 2 city council members on there. We had our Parks and Rec director. We had the Howelson Hill manager. We had representation from Ski Corps, kind of just partners and making sure we had a successful project. These are leaders in the industry, and they had done several lifts in the past that much bigger scale than ours. And we just wanted to make sure that partnership that we had with them we were kind of making the right moves and the right steps. So that pre-construction, we had built ourselves a budget. We had some really good stakeholders that were engaged and wanted us to help build that project. And we had what we thought was a project scope, and we knew that there was going to be project scope adjustment as we got going. Some really good advice that I got from somebody, right, was do something even if it's not right. And I think sometimes when you're in this pre-construction phase, you really don't know where that target is, because everything is still really foggy around you. So sometimes you just need to start moving and get some motion going. And in that process of making some early mistakes, you're able to really start focusing in on what's important and adjust that scope a little bit. So just doing something, even if it's not right, because sitting there and just overthinking things sometimes can really stall out a project. So have to be willing to fail kind of right out of the beginning of a project, and make quick adjustments and recover. But I think that's kind of critical in making things work, that you're really just, it's a new style of project for yourself. Project execution. We jumped into construction on this, operating as a GC, and early on we did make some really big scope adjustments. We had changed the alignment from the original Barrows chairlift alignment when it was a double chair, and moved it to so those tower placements could be on a much rockier ridge. We had been doing some soils investigation with a geotechnical engineer for a couple of years, watching slope movement, analyzing the depths of the bedrock on Howelson Hill, and picked the ideal placement that we thought of, where we could really put the lift. Hopefully the foundations would be good. And as we got into things, into our design of the chairlift for the spans that we were trying to hit for our tower placement, you get a different type of bearing capacity that the ground needs to support to hold up the poles and not have them tip. I think we have eight poles out there, and 7 of the 8 needed additional foundation stabilization of some type. We just weren't able to get the kind of load capacity out of the soils that were present on the slope. And so we made a quick adjustment that we went and started doing some micro piles underneath each one of those foundations. And that has impacts to budget, it had impacts to our cost structure that we had built for it. The whole time you're operating a project, you're monitoring your performance. Am I performing at my optimum? Are the things that I can do better? It's really easy at the end of a project to kind of do like a lessons learned look back on a project, and you'll really see those big milestones. But as a project manager or a construction manager, I think it's really crucial for you to hold yourself in a critical eye all the time. Every time you leave a progress meeting, was I communicating the right way? Were people hearing what I was saying? Did my message land well? Was my style of delivery, are people hearing what I'm saying? And I think that constant performance monitoring is something you're really going to have to be self-motivated and do yourself, because you might get some feedback on a large presentation or something like that, but it's something you're gonna have to self-govern. Closure. So for like final phase marks of as you're closing out the project and you're in your final phase, that is when it's easier to kind of look back at, holistically on a project, and how did I do? Did I hit my benchmarks and things like that, and really start tweaking your mindset on how your next project can be done. Lessons learned, I think, is so great when you're working with the staff. When I was managing the team in Lakeville, every year when we finished a recon project, or we called our other projects some of these like miscellaneous projects, when we'd group a bunch of civil projects together, we'd sit down and we'd kind of break those apart, like, hey, where did we execute really well on our estimate, our cost estimate on the beginning of it? Where are our prices really falling in line? Where should we make some adjustments as we look to do next year's work? How did the meetings go? How were you handling your progress meetings that happened every week? So it's a really good time. Obviously, I think I'm giving feedback at each one of those meetings that I'm having when I have staff working for me, but hearing at the end of the year and just kind of itemizing some takeaways from a project, I think as a project manager prepares for his next project, he can kind of look back at some of those bullet points and say, hey, these are some of the areas I need to execute a little bit better on in the next project. Still in strategy development, breaking down a project. At the beginning, it can be so overwhelming, sitting at that picnic table that day, talking about the chairlift, just with our internal team, we just had so many unknowns. It seemed super daunting that day. I had never built a chairlift or anything before. If we were sitting at that picnic table talking about running some large diameter pipe cross country, I'm super comfortable operating in that arena because I have experience in it. But when you're experiencing something new with a new project like that, you just have to figure out a way to kind of compartmentalize things. Just so you can kind of shed some familiarity on them, like, oh, okay, well, we've done concrete before, we've done foundations before, they're all the same, they're just a different shape, or we have different standards that we need to meet with a chairlift foundation versus like a spread footing for a building or something like that. So you can kind of break things down and start digesting that. How are you going to contract a project is also sometimes at the beginning of a project can be super daunting. Choosing the right way to move forward. I think I've been operating in the world of government for such a long time now. Everything is really hard bid. And, before the city signs a contract, we need to know exactly how much it's going to cost. We don't leave things for negotiation halfway through a project when we can't control those things. I personally like operating in the world of hard bid. It's really cut and dry. You have a very detailed contract of what the expectations are and how to hold people accountable. I like that method of bidding. Another way to break a project down is there's construction divisions. You have your civil work, you have your electrical work, you have your mechanical work, you have your concrete work. All those are different divisions. Once you start kind of funneling that information into all these different construction division buckets, it helps you when you get to that contracting point. How are you going to administer those contracts? Back to, are you going to have a general GC that does everything for you, or are you going to try to break it out and save theoretically some of that overhead dollars and manage it yourself? I like the self-management style, growing in my career and coming from the world of private and Kiewit. We were a self-performing contractor. So if we didn't have that resource to do it, is it something that we can go out and do successfully? We would analyze those things all the time. Sometimes we'd enter a market where we couldn't get concrete at the price we wanted to get it at. We would bring in a mobile batch plant, set up our own concrete and make our own concrete for a project just to save, $100,000 on something. That would make sense to us if we're pouring that many yards of concrete. So grouping a construction into different divisions, or grouping work by trades. If you have multiple different things on a chairlift project that an electrician would do, you group all those things together and build a bid package that electricians would then want to bid on, because you're giving them a larger scope of work for the project. And bidding packages, sometimes there is opportunities where you could include two things. I just talked about electrician. We had some low voltage communication fiber optics that went onto the chairlift as well. Originally, I thought I was going to bid those together with the electricians, but after kind of talking to a couple electricians, they didn't want to touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole, even though it was considered low voltage. They said, that's a completely different subset. So we ended up bidding that under two different bid packages. So, just kind of tapping your environment or your community and seeing what people are willing to bid on is an interesting way as you set up a project. Resource management. I think everybody gets really comfortable with kind of the world that they operate in or how they manage their daily workflow. I've kind of got a workflow that is very, very standard on a large project. Like I was working at Kiewit for years. We'd have a construction manager, you'd have superintendents level that would do civil work, structural work, your mechanical work, and then you'd have project managers underneath there that would kind of manage these, the subset below them, which would be field engineers, project engineers, and then that tree just keeps building down. When you're working on a project like that and have such a network of professionals that are working together, it's really easy to manage a lot of resources. Working for the city, we can cut off all those lower tiers. We really just have a construction manager. That's a very synonymous title to my development manager title right now. Like there's very little structure underneath me, and so I'm managing all those different pieces of the puzzle, which again, it can be daunting until you figure out a system and how to break things into categories where they can kind of self-manage, or you don't have to be part of something every single day. So it's building a system that works for you. Ultimately, you're managing time, you're managing your workforce, your equipment, your materials, your facilities. And I think, when you list things out super simply like that, it helps make the daunting more feasible. You can start building a schedule. You start getting things, everything's not happening at the same time. You've got a bunch of civil work that's going to be happening in June, and then your mechanical work starts in July. And so you kind of know that, hey, I'm going to be shifting gears as I move through this project, and then just managing my work that's in front of me. Allocating resources, again, something else I kind of learned early in my career is you have to build work plans. To be a project manager, you can't just show up and expect to just make decisions and the flow is just going to happen around you, and you're just, like the movies, you're standing in a job trailer and it all just happens. There's work plans. How is this work going to get executed? Ultimately, people are always looking up the chain for somebody to make that decision, and that's just the confidence that needs to happen in that construction manager or project manager role. You have to have a plan on how is that work going to happen. I certainly don't know everything there is about electrical, but at the end of the day, I know where I want it to start and I know where I want it to stop. How it happens in between there, I think that's the job of the electrician, and just communicating to him with, this is what I have. Here's my source power, and then here's how I want it to service this chairlift. Just that communication. It's their job to know the code and get it from point A to point B, but having a vision on how I want it to perform when it's done, that is my job. So that's part of the work plan. And sometimes it's even down to the play of the day. If you're managing a crew and you have 7 guys that are out there doing work for you every day, I think it's really important to have a work plan for every day. I've always called those play of the day. And you're just establishing, what are the objectives for today? What needs to happen today? So the work that I've got in my work plan for tomorrow, that can start on time and on task. Tracking your work, resource management, reducing weight, and eliminating rework. I think those are, again, some things that a project manager really needs to keep in their pocket at all times too. Managing your resources, not having people standing around, making sure that they're coming on the right day to do that task that they're assigned to do. That's reducing waste. And then eliminating rework. I think, as a contractor, when you carry the burden and you're eating into your profits as you're doing rework on a project, that's hard. But even as an owner, it's hard because it affects your schedule. It affects so many different things as you're trying to produce and get work done and get a park open or a project started. Still on the topic of resource management, I just brought up this is a snapshot of what I currently have going for Parks and Rec projects. I've got 20 projects that are specifically CIP projects for our department that are funded, and they're at different phases of, they may be in the conceptual phase that I'm just getting them started, or they may be like in the warranty closeout phase, and we're just closing those. So that's like a life cycle of projects that we have, 20 projects. And then we've got another 7 partner projects, Court Sports for Life, Mount Warner Water. These are just projects that we're also involved in, and I may have a different role. I may just be an owner's rep, the Mount Warner Water Ski Town Park Sanitary Interceptor Project. In our closeout of that project, and really I was an owner's rep because they have an easement that goes across our property on that one. So, my involvement or my obligation to that job is much left. It's still a job that I need to know those details about. I need to be able to stand up and answer a question if it's asked, from council or from my director at any time. So there's always a lot of things going on. Of this list, and in our department in Parks and Rec, I have another person that works for me as a project manager. I think I can see that they've got 6 full-time jobs that are assigned to them. So, when you're managing your resources, scheduling is really a big thing. Looking at 20 or even 27 projects that at some level I'm touching those projects or pushing those projects at some level can get really overwhelming. And I think having just a general schedule of when a project will be in like an intense phase really helps out, because then I know which ones I need to focus on. Obviously a really busy build season for us in Steamboat with our winter conditions is, mid-May through the end of October, I think is, when everything seems to get heavy. And so I really like to schedule things out. What are going to be my biggest time commitments, and they're going to take most of my resources. So I like having a schedule. I like having this that I can share with people what we're working on, but then I like to break it down even further so I know when I really need to be tuned into a project. And I love putting little notes kind of on the far right column on a schedule, or even on this page. I've kind of cut off my notes, and just more information is better. Budgeting. No matter who you're working for, there's got to be a way that these projects get funded. Looking through the lens of the city of Steamboat Springs, our capital improvement projects, I like to refer to them as CIPs, there's a process for that. To start the process, we internally, a manager, I'm going to go back to Howelson Hill, our Howelson Hill ski and rodeo manager will come up with an idea and say, hey, this is a capital improvement project. This is a problem we have, and we need to fix it. And I need to get our projects team involved in that. So we have a fillable form. It's probably tough to see on your screens, but we just have created a process. You can go through this. The top is kind of a checklist. It's health and safety, maintenance, protection of city's existing assets, satisfaction of a legal or contractual obligation. Basically, I want that manager, when he has an idea like, hey, I want to move forward with a capital improvement project, I ask them to fill out this form, and you go through and check these boxes, come up with a project title, what division it is. Give me a little background. What is the problem? We've got a CIP project for bleachers at the rodeo. We have bleachers that are reaching the end of their useful life. That's kind of the background information we're talking about. The job description is, we'd like to replace the bleachers. We're currently sitting, have spaces for 60 people right now. We'd like to increase that to 80 people, and get some of this background out of it. Recommendations, staff recommendations, typically I always like, yes, we'd like to do this project to remedy this problem. I let them list the job sponsors. Is it them? Is it somebody on their team that they want to be the job sponsor? I always like to see what people put for a budget, because I really think the budget starts getting formed once we kind of have that initial setback or starting meeting where we just kind of brainstorm out, like, what are all the different things that you want out of this project that we're affecting with this project. That brainstorming session really helps me sit down and start putting a dollar value to those things. So creating a process is critical, because then the information is coming in the same way. I can then take this information from this CIP request form and kind of start feeding it back into our city's 6-year CIP process. The city doesn't just look at 1 year to the next. We look at a kind of like a 6-year scope. I want to know if things are starting to fail at one of our parks and we're thinking, hey, we should start replacing this park. I'd like to know that 6 years out so we can kind of monitor it as we grow closer to that date. And if things start failing at a faster rate, we can always, skip a year. We can move that park restoration up sooner. Or if things, we had to fix something out there because something broke, it's like, oh, after that repair, I think we can probably get 2 more years out of it. We'll slide it back in that CIP process. But having a method to kind of track the pipeline of work is important, for budgeting for sure. This 6-year CIP, we're looking at that theoretical budget 6 years out, so we can kind of balance it, that we don't have a huge spike 1 year that, oh my gosh, we need $100 million to do all the projects that we want to do in 2026. Well, that doesn't make any sense if we're really only spending $20 million on an average year on CIP projects. Let's spread some of that out. Let's see how we can break that year down a little bit and make it fit into our funding stream and how much money we have for CIPs. So after we get a bunch of CIPs for your department, I'm just kind of talking about the city process. Once we get all of our CIPs put together this year, Parks and Rec assembled 31 different CIPs, different projects that were over $50,000. That's kind of the threshold when I get involved in a project if it's over $50,000. And then we prioritize it. That's done internally in the department with your staff. What are really of these 31 projects, what is a priority? Everybody always thinks whatever they're working on is their priority, but what is the priority for the department as a whole? And so we kind of internally rank them. A lot of discussion happens at this point, and we talk about deferred maintenance and all these kind of ideas go into how these priorities are set. Once we kind of come up with our top cluster of projects, we go and present all of the projects, all 31, to the project management team, letting them know which ones are our priority projects. The leadership team has a ranking criteria, and this will be familiar. Some of these same items were on our initial kickoff process, health and safety, satisfaction of legal contractual obligations, maintenance of city's existing assets, things like that allow us to score something. So now we're kind of ranking all of our Parks and Rec projects against all the other projects in the city, Public Works, any other department that has a project that they're trying to push forward, streets. And so we're ranking those. We only have so many dollars that we can fund these projects with every year. So from that ranking criteria, we actually get up and kind of give a 2 to 3 minute sales pitch on each one of these projects, kind of telling them the needs, the benefits, the risks that you have if you don't do these projects. So they get a ranking, they get a score. And then from that score, we see what falls above or below the budget line. Things that score really high usually are pretty fixed, and they're not in jeopardy of being negotiated against. But things that fall right around that budgeting line, we certainly take a look at several projects below the line, and we take a look at the several projects that are right above that budgeting line to see if it makes sense that we kind of jockey some of those things around. Is something more of a critical need than something else? Just from a timing standpoint, does it make sense to move this up into the 2024 and let something else try to go again in 2025 and see how it ranks? And then after that budget adjustment, these are taken forward to city council, and then they're approved. And then in January is typically when our life cycle of a new project or a new CIP that we've been awarded starts. And then the project budget starts. Again, I'm jumping back to the Howelson Hill chairlift replacement project. This was one of the first budgets that I kind of put together, and this is when we still had 2 vendors on the table. We had kind of courted Doppelmayr and Skytrack. Both had US-based presence, so we knew communication was going to be good with them. Both of them were interested in the job after we had released an RFP. They came back to us, and you can see I've got a delta in that right-hand column of $28,000. That original chairlift package was super tight between the 2 of them on how that shook out. So then we started carrying it into all the other work that needed to happen. So of that $3 million, we knew we were going to spend $1.7 million on a chairlift. At this point, we didn't know who it was from. So we tried to assign all these other tasks and make sure we were really comparing things apples to apples. And it really was, because we were able to get nearly identical scopes, both out of Doppelmayr and out of Skytrack, when we looked at things. The only difference when I come down here to my total to construct line item there is the contingency. I was carrying a 10% contingency on both of them, which just gave an additional like $2,000 in that, a little over $2,000 in that delta. So really between the 2 contractors, we had $30,000 between the 2 of them. So vendor selection at this point was, we're really almost right on point with the money. Which was the vendor that was going to are able to service our needs better. Doppelmayr, has a huge reputation for chairlifts. I think their expertise is really in the larger high-speed chairlifts, the detachables. Howelson Hill really that wasn't the niche we were going for. Howelson Hill was really a triple chair with a fixed grip. That really increased our capacity. The speed that the modern day fixed grips operated at was so much different than the 1971 Palma that we got used from the Steamboat Lake ski area in North Route, that we were able to increase our uphill capacity by so much that we kind of knew what we wanted. And then when we started looking and trying to break down these two vendors, whether it was Doppelmayr or Skytrack, everything started pointing to Skytrack. Skytrack was really targeting that niche market of smaller ski areas, fixed grip systems. So that's what really helped us in our vendor selection. Doppelmayr had a great reputation too, but their niche, I think, was just in a different category than what we were looking for at Howelson. So as the project progressed, I kind of talked earlier about the stakeholders that we had. This steering committee, we had Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club, we had representation for Parks and Rec, we had 2 council members, we had oversight from Ski Corps. We did a bi-weekly progress meeting that I ran, and the budget was always a huge portion of that meeting. Where are we at in our budget? And this was, if you're only meeting every 2 weeks, there was lots of changes that were happening during our construction. I tried to take just a snapshot of that original. Obviously, we deleted Doppelmayr off there once we selected Skytrack, and then there was that original estimate that we had at $3,800,000. And then I started doing actuals, and then what is the delta between the budget and the actuals? And a lot of conversation, but I think this is really important when you're running a project as a PM or a CM. Just to be, transparent about this stuff. The project will always ebb and flow. The money situation typically will always ebb and flow as well. When you start out a project, a lot of unidentified things from your scoping probably will kind of present themselves early on. And then as you work your way through the project, some of that financial risk, I'm showing a line item down to my considerations of a negative $280,000. We missed something by $280,000. I carried $100,000 in for something that was a $380,000 expense. And so as that project ebbed and flowed, it kind of worked itself back out. We actually closed this project just under budget. So to get us close to $3 million, we're really happy about that. And then being under budget was super positive for us. But having a tool and keeping it simple. I have a much more complex budget tracker that I use when I'm making payments, progress payments to a vendor. If I'm just paying invoices, it gets much more complicated than this. But for this meeting and this committee, it didn't need to be any more complicated than this. I had all these numbers rolling up into kind of that original look and that original budget that I presented, and I didn't need to change that because I think that would have just created more confusion. Communication. There's just a couple things. I think everybody has a style of communication that they like, and I know communication is one of those buzzwords that is so overplayed, and people kind of